The alarms on my console scream before I even understand why. My name is Kes Vantora, and I have served the Galactic Council for 30 cycles as a fleet liaison officer. I have stood on the bridge of the flagship Ardent Resolve during 11 tribute collections. I have watched proud species kneel, watched their leaders sign the old treaties with shaking hands, watched entire worlds accept their place in the order of things. I thought I understood how this worked. I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. Then we reached the edge of a yellow star system called Sol, and every instrument on my console told me something was wrong. We are not supposed to feel fear on a mission like this. The ardent resolve alone outweighs anything a newly contacted species could possibly build. Behind us trail 4 escort cruisers, each one older than the species we are about to visit. We are the Council's answer to any doubt, any hesitation, any thought of resistance. We arrive, we speak, and worlds comply. That is the pattern. That has always been the pattern. But there is one ship waiting for us at the edge of this system, and it is not running. I lean toward the sensor display, and Commander Doran Vex glances at me from the command chair with the kind of patience he reserves for subordinates he considers unnecessary. Doran Vex has led fleet operations for longer than I have been alive. His scales have gone the pale silver of age, and his voice carries the flat certainty of someone who has never lost.
"One vessel,"
he says, more to the room than to me.
"One vessel, meeting a fleet of 5.
Either this species is foolish, or it does not yet understand what it is looking at. I want to agree with him. I want to feel the same calm confidence that fills the bridge around me. Instead, I feel a cold weight settle in my chest as I read the numbers scrolling past on my screen. The ship ahead of us is small. That much is true. It is barely a tenth the size of even our smallest escort. By every visible measure, it should be nothing, a gnat standing before a storm, and yet it is not moving away from us. It is not powering weapons either, not that we can detect, and its shields, if it even has shields, show no unusual readings. There is no panic in its flight pattern, no attempt to signal for help, no burst of encrypted messages racing back toward the blue-green world behind it. The ship simply sits there, drifting at the boundary of the system, facing us directly, as if it has been waiting, as if it knew we were coming. Species designation, Doran Vex says. The database officer beside me, a council administrator named Prel Ashuan, taps at her console for a long moment before answering. Homeworld designation, Earth. 3rd planet from the local star. Species, human. Council contact status, none prior to this mission. First formal detection of technological activity was recorded approximately 200 cycles ago. Radio emissions, then orbital construction, then, she pauses, frowning at her own screen, then a gap in our surveillance records. Nearly 40 cycles with no updated intelligence. 40 cycles is not a small gap. 40 cycles is enough time for a species to go from primitive to advanced, if the conditions are right. I open my mouth to say this, but Doran Vex is already speaking over me, his tone dismissive. A gap in surveillance is an administrative failure, not a strategic concern. This is a young species, freshly noticed, sitting on a single habitable world, with no colonies and no allies. The Council has processed 1,000 worlds exactly like this one. We arrive, we demonstrate our strength, we offer them the honor of tribute status, and within a cycle they are grateful for the protection we extend to them. This is not complicated, Vantora. I say nothing more. It is not my place to argue with a fleet commander in front of the bridge crew, and perhaps he is right. Perhaps I am imagining danger where there is none, letting the strange stillness of that one small ship unsettle me more than it should. I have felt nervous before missions that turned out to be entirely uneventful. This could easily be another one of those times. But the feeling does not go away. If anything, it grows heavier the longer I watch that little ship hold its position. We advance closer, the ardent resolve, leading our formation like the head of a great slow beast. Our escort cruisers, spreading out on either side, in the standard approach pattern, designed to look impressive from any angle. This is theater as much as strategy. The sheer size of a council fleet has ended more conflicts before they began than any weapon we carry. Species see us coming, understand instantly what resistance would mean, and choose peace instead. It has worked this way for longer than most species have existed. I study the readings from the small human vessel again, searching for anything that might explain its confidence. Its hull composition is unfamiliar to our databases, a blend of metals and composites that our systems cannot fully categorize. Its engine signature burns with an efficiency that seems too advanced for a species with such a short recorded history of orbital flight. I flag both anomalies and send them to the tactical station, and I wait for someone to take them seriously. No one does. Probably scavenged technology, says the tactical officer, a broad-shouldered council soldier named Yorin Dask, without even looking up from his own display. Young species sometimes reverse-engineer debris that drifts into their systems. It happened with the Cottrell colonists 200 cycles ago. Explains nothing more than a bit of luck. It is a reasonable explanation. It is also, I think privately, exactly the kind of explanation people reach for when they do not want to consider a harder truth. As we draw nearer, Prelashun begins pulling up what little cultural data our long-range monitoring stations managed to collect from Earth's broadcasts over the decades before contact was lost. Fragments of entertainment media, snippets of news broadcasts, garbled recordings of what our translation algorithms label as historical documentaries. It is not much. It was never meant to be a complete picture, only enough for a preliminary briefing before contact. But even in these small pieces, something about the pattern bothers me. I ask Prel to send the files to my console, and she does, along with a look that suggests she thinks I am wasting both our time. I do not care. I begin scanning through the recordings while the fleet continues its approach, half listening to Doran Vex outline the standard tribute protocol to the rest of the bridge crew, as though we have not all heard it 100 times before. The recordings are fragmented, poorly translated, full of gaps where our monitoring equipment lost the signal entirely. But there are patterns even in fragments. I see images of conflict repeated across what appears to be centuries of this species' recorded history, conflict on a scale and frequency that seems almost impossible for a single world to sustain without destroying itself. And yet Earth has not destroyed itself. If anything, the fragments suggest a species that grew stronger, more organized, more capable, with every passing cycle of struggle. There is something else, too, something harder to name. A thread running through nearly every fragment of history I can find, a kind of stubbornness that borders on the incomprehensible, species facing certain defeat, according to every rational calculation, choosing to fight anyway, not once, not as an aberration. Again and again, across what looks like every era of their recorded existence, I flag this pattern as well, and send it up the chain, and again it is waved away, this time by Doran Vex himself, who has apparently noticed my repeated interruptions and decided to address them directly. Liaison Officer Vantora, he says, and the whole bridge quiets to listen. You have served on 11 successful tribute missions. You know as well as anyone how this proceeds. Every species we encounter has stories of struggle in their history, stories of resistance, of defiance, of heroes who refuse to surrender. It is the nature of young civilizations to romanticize their own conflicts. It means nothing about how they will behave when faced with a power they cannot begin to match. With respect, Commander, I say, choosing my words carefully, I have never seen a pattern quite like this one. The frequency of it, the persistence. Frequency and persistence in old broadcasts, recorded from a species we have barely begun to study, Doran Vex says, are not evidence of anything but incomplete data. We are the 5th fleet in Council history to reach a world this size with this little advance preparation, and every single mission before ours succeeded without incident. I do not intend to be remembered as the commander who grew nervous over decades-old recordings. There is quiet laughter from a few positions on the bridge, not cruel, just the easy laughter of soldiers who have done this before and expect to do it again without difficulty. I feel my face flush with something between embarrassment and frustration, but I do not push the matter further. What more can I say? I have no proof, only a feeling, and feelings have never been enough to change the mind of a fleet commander who has never lost. We continue our approach. The small human ship still has not moved. As we draw within communication range, our sensors confirm what the earlier scans suggested. This vessel carries no visible weapon systems that our databases recognize, no shields powering up in anticipation of conflict, nothing that would suggest an intention to fight a battle it could not possibly win. By every measure the Council has ever used to judge these situations, This ship should be harmless. This ship should be exactly what Doran Vex believes it is. A curiosity, a lone scout, sent to observe our arrival before its species inevitably submits to the inevitable. And yet I cannot shake the feeling that we are looking at this entirely wrong, that every measure we are using to judge this vessel, every calculation built from 1,000 previous missions against 1,000 other species, simply does not apply here. That we are treating a locked door as though it were already open, simply because every door we have ever encountered before has opened the same way. Prela Shun interrupts my thoughts with a soft chime from her console. Commander, we are within hailing range. Standard tribute demand transmission is ready to send on your order. Doran Vex straightens in his seat, and something in his posture shifts, the casual confidence sharpening into the practiced formality of a commander about to deliver a message he has delivered 100 times before. I watch him settle into the role, watch the bridge crew around him fall silent in anticipation, everyone certain of exactly how the next few moments will unfold. I look one more time at the small, still, silent ship waiting for us at the edge of the system, and the cold feeling in my chest tightens into something closer to dread. Send it, Doran Vex says. And the message goes out across the dark distance between our fleet and that single waiting vessel, carrying with it demands that have never once, in the recorded history of the Galactic Council, been refused. I do not know yet that I am about to witness the first refusal in that history. I do not know that the words about to come back to us will be remembered, retold, and feared across 1,000 worlds for generations to come. All I know, as the transmission crosses the void toward that small and silent human ship, is that the cold feeling in my chest has not eased even slightly, and that some part of me, some part I cannot yet explain even to myself, already understands that nothing about this mission is going to go the way Commander Doran Vex expects. The seconds stretch out as we wait for a response. On the bridge, no one speaks. Even Yoren Dask has stopped his idle scrolling through tactical readouts to watch the main display, where the tiny human vessel sits motionless against the stars, giving no outward sign that it has received our message at all. Then, without warning, the communication channel opens, and for the first time in the history of the Council, someone is about to answer us in a way none of us are prepared for. The image resolves on the main display, and the entire bridge leans forward as one. I do not know what I expected. Perhaps a frightened face, pale and uncertain, the kind of expression I have seen on a dozen worlds facing the Council fleet for the first time. Perhaps a leader in ceremonial dress, speaking careful, rehearsed words of welcome, trying to buy time or favor with politeness. I have seen both reactions many times, and I braced myself for something like them. What appears on the screen is neither. A man sits in a plain chair on the bridge of that small ship, and there is nothing ceremonial about him at all. His uniform is simple, dark, unadorned by the medals or symbols of rank that most species use to announce authority. His expression is calm, in a way that unsettles me more than fear would have. Not the calm of ignorance, the calm of someone who does not understand the danger he is in. This is a different kind of calm entirely, the kind that comes from a person who understands the danger completely and has already decided how he feels about it. This is the Council Fleet Vessel Ardent Resolve, Doran Vex says, his voice carrying the practiced weight of 1,000 identical openings. You are addressing Fleet Commander Doran Vex, acting on behalf of the Galactic Council. Your world has been identified as a newly detected civilization, eligible for tribute status. State your designation and prepare to receive our terms. The man on the screen does not answer immediately. He studies us instead, his gaze moving slowly across whatever image his own systems are displaying of our fleet. And I find myself wondering what he sees when he looks at 5 Council warships, arranged in a formation designed specifically to inspire submission. Does he see the same overwhelming power that has ended 1,000 negotiations before they began? Or does he see something else, something the rest of us are missing? Captain Daniel Hart, he finally says. His voice is steady, unhurried, carrying none of the tension I would expect from someone facing down a fleet capable of erasing his entire species. United Earthship Valiant, I've been asked to relay a response to whatever you're about to say. Doran Vex's posture stiffens slightly, though his voice remains level. Even after this small deviation from the script, he does not seem concerned. Why would he be? Every species eventually says something unexpected before falling in line. It is simply part of the process. Then you already know why we have come, Doran Vex continues. Your world, Earth, has developed sufficient technological capability to warrant formal notice under council law. As is customary, we extend an offer. Submit your world to tribute status, accept the protection and guidance of the council, and your species will be permitted to continue its development under our oversight. Refusal is not a rational option. I trust your leadership has prepared you to accept these terms on their behalf. I watch Captain Hart's face carefully as the demand finishes, searching for the reaction I have seen so many times before. The slow dawning of fear, the calculation of impossible odds, the quiet resignation that comes just before acceptance. I have watched this exact moment unfold on 11 other worlds, and I know precisely what it looks like when a species realizes it has no choice. I do not see any of that now. Instead, something flickers across Captain Hart's face that I can only describe as amusement, quickly suppressed but unmistakable, there and gone in the space of a single breath. He glances briefly to one side, as though someone off-screen has said something to him, then returns his attention to the display, and to us. I appreciate you explaining all that, he says. Really. But I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding about what's supposed to happen here. There is no misunderstanding, Doran Vex says, and for the first time I hear the faintest edge creeping into his voice, the sound of a man accustomed to being obeyed, encountering, for the very first time, someone who is not immediately falling into line. This is not a negotiation, Captain Hart. This is a notice. Your world will comply, or your world will face the consequences the Council reserves for those who reject our terms. Captain Hart nods slowly, as though considering this seriously, and for one strange moment, I almost believe he is about to relent, about to give us the answer every other species has given before him. The bridge around me seems to hold its breath in anticipation. Prel Ashun's hands hover over her console, ready to log the formal acceptance the moment it comes. Yoren Dask leans back in his chair with the satisfied posture of a man watching a familiar and predictable outcome unfold exactly as expected. Then Captain Hart leans forward slightly, and the amusement in his expression sharpens into something colder, something with an edge I do not have a name for yet. Bring your fleet, he says. 3 words, that is all. No explanation, no elaboration, no gesture toward negotiation or compromise. He does not even raise his voice to say them. He says them the way a person might comment on the weather, 3 simple words delivered with a calm certainty that seems entirely disconnected from the situation, as I understand it. For a moment, nobody on the bridge moves. Then the channel closes, the screen flickering back to the empty stretch of stars, and the small human vessel remains exactly where it has been the entire time, motionless, unhurried, giving no indication whatsoever that anything unusual has just occurred. The silence that follows on our bridge is unlike any silence I have experienced in 30 cycles of service. It is not the comfortable silence of routine, nor the tense silence of anticipation. It is the silence of an entire room trying to process something that does not fit into any framework they have ever used before. Yoren Dask is the first to break it, and when he does, his voice carries a note of disbelief that borders on offense. Did he just... He stops, starts again. Did that human just dismiss us? He said 3 words, Prel Ashun says slowly, still staring at the now empty display, as though the image of Captain Hart might reappear, if she looks hard enough. He didn't even ask what our terms were. He didn't ask what happens if they refuse. He just... She shakes her head, unable to finish the thought. I find myself unable to speak at all. Every part of my training tells me this moment should feel absurd, should feel like nothing more than the bravado of a species too young and too isolated to understand the true scale of what it is facing. A single ship, a single captain, speaking 3 words of defiance to a fleet capable of ending his entire civilization within hours. By every rational measure, this should be laughable. And yet I cannot laugh. Because I remember, even as the bridge crew around me begins to murmur with a mixture of anger and disbelief, the fragments of history I reviewed only minutes earlier. The pattern of a species that faced impossible odds again and again throughout its recorded existence, and chose, again and again, to fight anyway. Not because they believed they could win by any conventional measure, because something in the nature of this species made surrender a choice they were simply unwilling to make, regardless of the cost. Bring your fleet. Those 3 words settle into my mind and refuse to leave, turning over and over as I try to understand what kind of confidence, or desperation, or something else entirely could produce them. Is this defiance born of ignorance? A species too new to the wider universe to understand what it is truly facing? Or is this defiance born of something far more dangerous? A species that understands exactly what it is facing and has decided, with terrible clarity, that it does not care. Doran Vex's expression, when I finally look at him, has hardened into something I have never seen on his face before. Not concern. Not yet. Something closer to insult. The particular fury of a man who has spent his entire career being obeyed, and has just been dismissed in 3 words by a species barely old enough, in council terms, to be worth noticing at all. "Helm," he says, his voice flat and controlled in a way that somehow feels more dangerous than shouting would have. "Hold position. Communications. Resend the standard notice. Perhaps our translation systems failed to convey the full weight of the terms." I want to tell him that the translation was fine, that Captain Hart understood every word of our demand perfectly, and that his response was not a failure of communication, but a deliberate, calculated answer to a question he had clearly already decided how to answer, long before our fleet ever arrived in this system. But I say nothing, because I do not yet have the proof to back up what I am beginning to suspect. Only the cold, growing certainty that we have made a terrible mistake in how we approach this world. Prelashun resends the notice, and once again, the small human vessel remains motionless. And once again, after a pause that feels far too calm for the situation, the channel opens. Captain Hart's face appears on the screen again, and this time there is no flicker of amusement at all. His expression has settled into something quieter, something almost gentle, the way a person might look when delivering news they know the listener does not want to hear. "I already gave you my answer," he says. And the channel closes again, and this time it does not reopen no matter how many times Prelashun attempts to reach it, and the bridge of the ardent resolve is left staring at the image of that small, still, silent ship, while somewhere deep in my chest, the cold feeling I have carried since we first entered this system finally settles into something I can no longer ignore or explain away. We are not dealing with a species that does not understand the danger it is in. We are dealing with a species that understands it perfectly and has already decided, with a certainty that chills me more than any weapon could, exactly what it intends to do about it. Doran Vex orders the fleet to hold position while he consults with Council Command, his voice tight with an anger that has not yet cooled into anything resembling caution. Around me, the bridge crew begins to settle back into their usual rhythms, murmuring among themselves about the strange, brief encounter, already beginning to rebuild their confidence into something resembling normal. I do not join them. Instead, I return to my console, pull up every fragment of Earth's history our monitoring stations ever managed to collect, and begin searching, more carefully this time, more desperately, for anything that might explain what those 3 words truly meant, and what kind of storm we may have just invited by sending our fleet across the edge of this quiet, waiting, watching system. I spend the next several hours buried in every scrap of information our monitoring stations ever collected from Earth, and by the time I finish, my hands are trembling in a way I have not felt since my very first mission as a junior officer. The archive is incomplete. That much is clear from the start. Whoever managed Earth's surveillance decades ago either grew careless or grew afraid, because the records stop and start in strange places, gaps stretching across years at a time, as though someone simply lost interest or lost their nerve. What remains is a patchwork of broadcasts, translated imperfectly by systems never designed for a language this strange, but even in fragments, a picture begins to form, and it is not the picture Commander Doran Vex believes it to be. I begin with the oldest recordings, grainy and degraded, showing what our systems label as historical reconstructions of early human conflict. Groups of these creatures, armed with tools barely more advanced than sharpened metal, meeting on open fields to settle disputes through direct combat. Nothing unusual there. Nearly every species passes through an era like this before civilization tempers its worst instincts. I have seen similar records from a dozen other worlds during my training. What catches my attention is what happens next. As I move forward through the timeline, watching centuries compress into minutes of translated footage, I notice that human conflict does not fade as their civilization advances. On most worlds the Council has studied, technological progress brings a gradual softening, disputes settled increasingly through negotiation and trade, as the cost of open conflict grows too high to bear. Earth follows the opposite pattern entirely. As their weapons grow more capable, their conflicts grow larger, more organized, and somehow, impossibly, more frequent, spanning greater distances with each passing generation, until entire portions of their world are drawn into struggles that our translation systems label, with a bluntness that makes my chest tighten, as world-spanning. And yet the species does not collapse. This is the detail that unsettles me most. On every other world I have studied, conflict on this scale eventually breaks a civilization, fracturing it into smaller, weaker pieces that never recover their former strength. Earth does the opposite. Each time the recordings show devastation on a scale that should have ended them, the following years show recovery, rebuilding, and growth that somehow exceeds what came before. It is as though every attempt to break this species only teaches it how to become harder to break the next time. I flag this pattern and continue searching, moving through what appears to be a period our systems label as a long peace, though even this peace is riddled with smaller conflicts scattered across their world, like embers that never quite go out. Then I find something that makes me stop entirely. A recording, badly degraded, shows what our translation system interprets as a leader addressing a gathered crowd, during what the accompanying data labels as a moment of extreme crisis for this civilization. I cannot make out most of the words, the audio too damaged for our systems to parse cleanly, but a handful of phrases come through clearly enough to translate, and I read them 3 times before I am certain I have understood correctly. "We shall fight," the fragment reads, "on the beaches, in the fields, and in the hills. We shall never surrender." I sit back from my console, and for a long moment, I simply stare at those words, trying to understand what kind of civilization produces leaders who speak this way to their people during moments of desperation, and what kind of people respond to words like these, not with despair but, according to the historical data that follows, with renewed resolve. I gather everything I have found and request an immediate audience with Commander Doran Vex, and to his credit, he grants it, though the impatience in his expression makes clear he considers this a waste of time he does not have. I lay out the pattern for him as clearly as I can. The persistence of conflict across their history, the refusal of their civilization to weaken under pressure that would have fractured almost any other species we have studied, the strange, recurring theme of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds, expressed again and again by leaders and ordinary members of their species alike, across what appears to be every era of their recorded existence. Doran Vex listens to all of it without interruption, and when I finish, he is quiet for a long moment before responding, and I allow myself to hope, briefly, that I have finally reached him. "You have shown me," he says slowly, "that this species has a long and violent history. That much I do not dispute. But Vantora, every species we have ever encountered has a violent history somewhere in its past. It is the nature of intelligent life to struggle before it learns to cooperate. What you are describing is not unique. It is simply the ordinary growing pains of a young civilization, viewed through the lens of incomplete and poorly translated records. With respect, Commander, the pattern does not fade the way it does on other worlds. It grows more organized, more resilient. Every time this species is pushed toward collapse, it adapts and returns stronger than before. I have never seen anything like this in any other world's history." "And what would you have me do with this information?" Doran Vex asks, and there is a weariness in his voice now, the particular exhaustion of a commander who has spent his career following a proven process and does not appreciate being told, by a junior liaison officer, that the process might be flawed. "Withdraw the fleet? Abandon a mission the Council has already authorized, based on nothing more than old broadcasts and a feeling you cannot fully explain? I do not have an answer to that. I know how it sounds. I know that everything I am describing could, if viewed with enough skepticism, be dismissed exactly the way Doran Vex is dismissing it now, as coincidence, as incomplete data, as the natural anxiety of an officer facing an unfamiliar situation for the first time. I have no proof that would satisfy a fleet commander who has succeeded 11 times before using the same methods he intends to use again now. I am only asking that we proceed with caution, I say finally. That we consider the possibility that this species may respond differently than others have, and that we prepare accordingly. Doran Vex studies me for a long moment, and something in his expression softens slightly, enough that I understand he does not think I am being foolish, only overly cautious. I hear your concerns, Vantora, and I do not dismiss them entirely, but consider this from my position. Every fleet commander who has ever grown too cautious in the face of a young species has been remembered not for wisdom, but for weakness. The Council does not reward hesitation. If I withdraw this fleet based on old broadcasts and a captain's dramatic 3 words, I will have handed this species a victory it has not earned, and I will have taught every other unaligned world watching that defiance works. That is a far greater danger than whatever this species might actually be capable of. There is a certain logic to what he says, and I understand it even as I disagree with it. The Council's power has always rested as much on reputation as on actual force. A single visible retreat, a single moment of hesitation broadcast across the galaxy, could undo generations of carefully built authority. Doran Vex is not wrong to fear that outcome. He is simply, I believe, wrong about which danger is greater. I will authorize increased tactical readiness, he says finally, something of a concession in his tone, though not nearly enough to ease the cold feeling still sitting in my chest. Shields at standard alert. Weapons systems monitored, but not engaged. If this Captain Hart intends some kind of demonstration, we will be prepared to respond appropriately. But we will not withdraw, and we will not delay the mission timeline. The Council has waited long enough for this species to be brought into the fold, and I do not intend to be the commander remembered for turning back at the first sign of stubbornness. I return to my station with little comfort in the small concession he has granted me. Increased tactical readiness is better than nothing, but it is not the caution I believe this situation truly demands. I look again at the fragments of history spread across my console, at the recurring image of a species that faces impossible odds and chooses defiance rather than surrender, generation after generation, without exception that I have yet been able to find. I think again of those 3 words: bring your fleet. Not a threat, not bravado, or at least not only bravado. Now that I understand more of this species' history, I begin to wonder if those words were something closer to an invitation, spoken by a species that has spent its entire recorded existence learning exactly what to do when overwhelming force arrives at its door, and has decided, this time, not to wait and see what happens, but to meet that force head-on, with whatever confidence generations of hard-won survival have taught it to carry. I do not know yet how right I am. I only know that as I sit at my station, watching the small human vessel remain perfectly still on our sensor display, giving no outward sign of the storm I now suspect is gathering behind it, the cold feeling in my chest has grown into something closer to dread, and no amount of tactical readiness Doran Vex authorizes feels like enough to prepare us for whatever is coming next. Prella Shun approaches my station sometime later, her expression more thoughtful than it has been since we arrived in this system. She has clearly heard something of my exchange with the commander, and though she says nothing about it directly, she sets a datapad on my console before returning to her own post. I glance down at it and find a single additional fragment she has pulled from the archive, one I had not yet reached in my own search. It shows another recording, another leader from a different era of Earth's long and turbulent history, addressing another crowd during what the data suggests was another moment of extreme crisis. The translation is imperfect, fragments missing where the original signal degraded beyond recovery, but the meaning comes through clearly enough. We do not choose our battles because we believe we will win, the fragment reads. We choose them because giving up was never an option we were willing to consider. I read the words twice, then a third time, and somewhere behind me, unnoticed by the rest of the bridge crew still murmuring about tactical readiness and mission timelines, the small human vessel continues to sit motionless at the edge of the system, patient, silent, and utterly unafraid. It is Prella Shun who finds the report that changes everything, though neither of us understands its full weight until several hours later, when it is already too late to matter. She comes to my station quietly, glancing over her shoulder toward the command chair before speaking, and I recognize immediately the careful posture of someone about to share information she is not entirely certain she should be sharing. "I found something in the old fleet archive," she says, keeping her voice low. "It came up while I was searching for anything related to prior council contact with this system. I do not think it was meant to be easily found." She transfers the file to my console, and I open it, expecting perhaps another fragment of surveillance data, another broadcast recording pulled from Earth's long history. What I find instead is a formal council incident report, filed decades earlier, marked with a classification level well above anything a liaison officer of my rank should have access to. The report concerns a council scout vessel, designated Wandering Star, dispatched to conduct a routine survey of Earth's system nearly 30 cycles before our own arrival. According to the official record, the Wandering Star suffered a catastrophic systems failure during its approach and was destroyed by an unexpected collision with asteroid debris, a tragic but unremarkable accident of the kind that occasionally claims council vessels operating in unmapped systems. I read the official summary twice, and something about its careful, tidy language bothers me immediately. Reports of genuine accidents rarely read this cleanly. There is always some acknowledgement of uncertainty, some list of alternative explanations considered and ruled out, some trace of the messy process that goes into determining what actually happened to a lost ship. This report reads instead like a conclusion reached before the investigation even began. I dig further into the file, past the official summary, into the raw sensor logs attached as supporting documentation, and here the story begins to fall apart entirely. The sensor data shows the Wandering Star approaching Earth's system exactly as the summary describes, its scout systems actively scanning the third planet's surface and orbital space in the standard pattern used for preliminary species assessment. Then, without warning, the logs show something small and fast approaching from the direction of the planet itself, moving with a precision that no random debris field could ever produce. The scout vessel's own systems register the object closing distance at a speed and trajectory that our current classification systems would label as a deliberate intercept, not an accidental collision. The logs end abruptly less than a minute later, the Wandering Star's transmissions cutting off mid-signal in a way that matches every characteristic of a directed strike, rather than the slow, chaotic destruction that debris collision typically produces. I sit back from my console, my mind racing to process what I am looking at. This was not an accident. 30 cycles ago, before any formal contact had been established, before Earth was even aware, as far as our records suggest, that they had been noticed by anything beyond their own world, something from that planet reached out and destroyed a council vessel with what can only be described as precision and intent. And someone within the council chose to bury that fact entirely, filing instead a tidy report about asteroid debris that would raise no alarms, ask no uncomfortable questions, and require no reconsideration of how this species should eventually be approached. I bring the file immediately to Prel Ashun's station, and together we work through the remaining documentation attached to the report, searching for any explanation of why this decision was made. We find it eventually, buried in a set of internal correspondence between council officials from that period, discussing the incident in language far more cautious and uncertain than the official summary ever revealed. One message in particular stands out to me, sent by an official whose name has been redacted from the file, addressed to a superior whose identity has likewise been removed. Premature confrontation with an unknown and clearly capable adversary serves no one's interests, the message reads. Recommend classification as accidental loss pending further, quieter observation. A public acknowledgement of hostile action against a council vessel would demand immediate retaliatory response under standing protocol, and we are not yet prepared to commit resources to a conflict whose scope we do not understand. I read the message several times, feeling the cold weight in my chest grow heavier with every pass. Someone, decades ago, recognized exactly what I have only begun to suspect over the past several hours, that this species, even in its earlier and presumably less advanced state, was capable of striking back against a council vessel with a level of precision and intent that should have demanded serious concern. And rather than confront that reality, rather than adjust the council's approach to account for what they had witnessed, they chose to bury it, to quietly observe from a distance instead, and eventually, it seems, to lose interest entirely, allowing decades to pass with no meaningful update to Earth's threat assessment. The gap in our surveillance records, the 40 cycles of silence that Prela Shun noted when we first arrived in this system, suddenly makes a terrible kind of sense. It was not administrative failure, as Doran Vex assumed. It was deliberate withdrawal, a decision made by officials who understood something about this species that the rest of the council was never allowed to learn. I bring this discovery to Doran Vex immediately, interrupting his review of tactical readiness reports with an urgency I have not permitted myself since we entered this system. He listens as I explain the report, the sensor logs, the buried correspondence, and for the first time since our arrival, I watch something like genuine unease cross his expression. But it does not last. "This report is decades old," he says finally, after a long silence spent studying the files I have shown him. "Filed by officials whose judgment I cannot verify, describing an incident with incomplete data and no independent confirmation. Even if I accept your interpretation of these logs, Vantora, we are talking about a single incident from a species that, by every measure we have taken since arriving, has advanced considerably in the decades since. Whatever they were capable of then tells us little about what they are capable of now. With respect, Commander, that is precisely my concern. If they were capable of something like this 30 cycles ago, and their civilization has spent the intervening decades advancing exactly as every other pattern in their history suggests, then what we witnessed with the Wandering Star may represent only a small fraction of what we could be facing today." Doran Vex is quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from the report on his screen to the sensor readout showing the small, still, silent human vessel waiting patiently at the edge of the system. I watch him weigh the possibility I am describing against everything his career and his training have taught him to believe about how these missions proceed, and I understand, even before he speaks again, that the weight of 11 previous successes is heavier than anything I have shown him today. "I appreciate your diligence, Vantora," he says finally, and there is something almost gentle in his voice now, the tone of a commander trying to reassure a subordinate whose concerns he considers understandable, but ultimately unfounded. "But we cannot make decisions of this magnitude based on a single decades-old incident that may well have been exactly what the original report described. Debris fields are unpredictable. Sensor logs from equipment that old can be misread. I will forward this file to Council Command for further review once this mission concludes, and if there is truly cause for concern, it will be addressed through proper channels at that time." "And in the meantime?" I ask, unable to keep a note of frustration from creeping into my voice. "In the meantime," Doran Vex says, "we proceed with the mission as planned, with the increased tactical readiness I have already authorized. If this Captain Hart intends some kind of demonstration, we will be prepared. But I will not delay this mission further, and I will not withdraw this fleet, based on a report that even you admit is decades old and incomplete." I leave his station with the growing, sickening certainty that we are walking directly into a situation this species has spent decades preparing for, guided by a council leadership that either does not understand the danger, or has chosen, for reasons of pride and precedent, not to acknowledge it. I return to Prela Shun's station, and together, we continue searching the archive for anything else that might have been buried alongside the Wandering Star report. We find fragments here and there, small pieces of evidence suggesting that Earth's technological development accelerated sharply in the years following that first, quiet strike, as though the encounter with our scout vessel taught this species something valuable about what it was facing in the wider universe, and how urgently it needed to prepare. I think again of the pattern I traced through their history earlier, a species that grows stronger every time it is pushed toward collapse, a species that meets overwhelming force not with despair but with renewed, terrible resolve. And now, layered over that pattern, a piece of direct evidence suggesting that this same species has already faced the Council once before, has already struck back with precision and success, and has spent the decades since quietly, patiently, preparing for the day the rest of the fleet finally arrived. "Bring your fleet," Captain Hart said, and I understand now, with a clarity that leaves no room for the comfort of doubt, that those were not the words of a species hoping to bluff its way through an impossible confrontation. Those were the words of a species that has been waiting for this moment for 30 cycles, and has used every one of them well. I glance at the mission clock displayed on my console, counting down the hours until Doran Vex's tribute ultimatum is set to expire, and for the first time since we arrived in this system, I find myself hoping, quietly, and against everything my training has taught me to expect, that the Council fleet surrounding me is far better prepared for what is coming than I currently believe it to be. The countdown begins the moment Doran Vex formally logs the ultimatum, and from that instant forward, every hour that passes feels heavier than the one before it. 24 hours, the message states, transmitted once more toward the small human vessel still holding its position at the edge of the system. 24 hours for Earth to formally accept tribute status under Council law, or face what the message describes, in the careful, bureaucratic language the Council has used for centuries, as corrective action deemed necessary to ensure compliance. No response comes back this time. The small ship simply continues to sit where it has been since our arrival, offering no acknowledgement, no counter-demand, no final attempt at negotiation. For the first several hours, I almost find this silence reassuring. Perhaps, I tell myself, Captain Hart's 3 words were nothing more than a moment of defiance, quickly reconsidered once the reality of the situation settled in. Perhaps somewhere on that world below us, calmer voices are already working to find a path toward peaceful compliance. I stop believing this by the 4th hour, when Prela Shun calls me over to her station with an expression I have come to recognize over the past day, as the particular look she wears when she has found something she does not want to be the one to report. Long-range sensors are picking up movement, she says, pulling up a display that shows a wide field of readings from across Earth's system. Multiple contacts, small craft, launching from the planet's surface, and from what appear to be several orbital platforms we had not previously detected. I study the display carefully, and my first instinct, the one drilled into me by years of standard tribute missions, is to expect the pattern I have seen so many times before: panicked evacuation attempts, desperate last-minute negotiations, defensive formations thrown together in haste around population centers, the visible signature of a civilization bracing for an attack it knows it cannot survive. What I see instead does not match that pattern at all. The craft, launching from Earth's surface, and its previously undetected orbital platforms, are not clustering defensively around population centers. They are not fleeing toward the outer edges of the system in a desperate attempt to escape. Instead, they are moving with a precision that reminds me uncomfortably of the sensor logs I reviewed from the Wandering Star incident. Small, fast-moving vessels taking up positions across the system, with a coordination that suggests planning executed over a much longer time frame than the few hours since our ultimatum was issued. This is not a defensive response, I say quietly, more to myself than to Prela Shun, though she nods slowly in agreement. It does not look like one, she says. It looks like they already knew what positions they wanted to occupy. It looks like they have been planning exactly this for some time. I bring the readings immediately to Doran Vex, and this time I do not soften my language the way I have tried to during previous conversations. I lay out exactly what the sensor data shows, exactly how closely it echoes the coordinated precision described in the buried Wandering Star report, and exactly what I believe it means about how long this species has been preparing for our arrival. Doran Vex studies the display for a long moment, and I can see him working to reconcile what he is looking at with everything his training and experience have taught him to expect. To his credit, some of the easy confidence I saw in him during our first hours in this system has faded, replaced by a more careful, measured focus that I recognize as the beginning of genuine concern, even if he is not yet willing to name it as such. Increase tactical readiness to full alert, he says finally, and the order carries none of the reluctance I heard in his earlier concessions. Shields at maximum, weapons systems fully powered but holding position. I want continuous tracking on every contact showing on that display, and I want projected trajectories the moment we have enough data to calculate them. The bridge shifts immediately into a different rhythm, the casual confidence of earlier hours, replaced by the focused tension of a crew finally beginning to understand that something unusual is unfolding around them. I watch officers who dismissed my concerns only hours earlier, now leaning forward over their consoles with new urgency, and I take no satisfaction in finally being taken seriously. The cold feeling in my chest has only grown heavier with every passing hour, and being right about the danger brings no comfort at all when that danger is bearing down on all of us regardless. Over the following hours, the picture across Earth's system continues to sharpen, and with every new detail, My sense of unease deepens further. The small craft we detected earlier are not simply holding position randomly. As Prella Shun and the tactical team work through the projected trajectories, a pattern begins to emerge that none of us are prepared for. The human vessels are not clustering around their homeworld in a defensive formation designed to protect it. They are spreading outward, positioning themselves at what appear to be carefully chosen points across the system. Points that, when I overlay them against our own fleet's current position and projected approach vectors, seem to form something far more deliberate than a simple defensive perimeter. It looks almost like a net, Yoran Dask says quietly, studying the same display over my shoulder, and for once there is no dismissiveness in his voice at all, only the same growing unease the rest of us are struggling to contain. I do not have a better word for it either. Every previous tribute mission I have participated in followed a predictable arc once resistance was detected, if resistance appeared at all. Frightened populations, hasty, poorly coordinated defenses thrown up around cities and critical infrastructure, desperate attempts at last-minute negotiation once the true scale of the Council fleet's power became undeniable. What we are witnessing instead is calm, coordinated, and unhurried, small craft moving into position with the confidence of a plan rehearsed many times before, executed now, not in desperation, but in patient anticipation of exactly this moment. I think again of the historical fragments I gathered earlier, of a species that grows more organized and more capable every time it faces overwhelming pressure, that has spent generations learning not simply how to survive against impossible odds, but how to prepare for them in advance, methodically, without panic. I think of the wandering star, destroyed decades ago by a single precise strike from a civilization the Council chose to quietly observe rather than seriously study. And I think of those 3 words, spoken with such calm certainty by a captain who did not flinch even slightly when facing down a fleet capable of ending his entire world. Bring your fleet. Not bravado, not desperation. An invitation, extended by a species that has spent 30 cycles since its first encounter with the Council preparing, quietly and patiently, for the day a larger fleet would finally arrive at its door, and has used every one of those years exceptionally well. As the 24-hour deadline draws closer, I find myself watching the mission clock with a growing sense of dread that no amount of increased tactical readiness seems able to ease. Doran Vex has ordered every precaution the Council's standard protocols allow for, and yet I cannot shake the feeling that we are still measuring this situation using tools built for a different kind of species entirely, tools that may simply be inadequate for whatever we are truly facing. I attempt, one final time, to convince Doran Vex to consider withdrawal, or at the very least a significant delay to allow for more careful assessment of what we are seeing across the system. He listens to me more patiently than he has at any point since our arrival, and for a moment, I believe I may finally be reaching him. But in the end, he shakes his head slowly, and I can see in his expression the same impossible weight I noticed earlier, the crushing pressure of Council precedent, of 11 previous successful missions, of a reputation built over a long career, that he cannot bring himself to risk, even now, even with everything the sensor data is showing us. If I withdraw this fleet now, he says quietly, based on defensive posturing that has not yet resulted in a single hostile act, I will be handing this species, and every other species watching from the shadows of this galaxy, proof that defiance works. I cannot do that, Vantora. Not without something more concrete than positioning and old reports to justify it. And if the deadline passes and they do not comply, I ask, then we will see exactly what this species is prepared to do, he says, and we will respond accordingly. I return to my station as the final hour of the countdown begins, watching the small, patient positions of Earth's scattered vessels across the system display, watching the mission clock tick steadily toward 0, and feeling, with a certainty I cannot fully explain even to myself, that whatever Doran Vex believes we are prepared to see, none of us are actually ready for what is about to happen. The deadline arrives in silence. No message comes from the small human vessel still holding its original position at the edge of the system. No formal acceptance of tribute status arrives from Earth's surface. No final plea for mercy. No desperate offer of negotiation. Nothing at all beyond the same calm, patient stillness that has defined this species' every response since the moment our fleet first entered their system. And then, Exactly as the mission clock crosses into the negative, every sensor on the bridge of the Ardent Resolve begins registering movement across the entire system at once, and I understand, in the space of a single terrified breath, that whatever calm preparation this species has spent 30 cycles perfecting is finally, fully, and completely underway. Everything happens faster than my mind can properly track, and even now, remembering it, I find myself struggling to arrange the events in their correct order. The first thing I understand clearly is that this is not a defense. A defense would concentrate around Earth itself, around the population centers and orbital platforms this species has spent generations building. What unfolds instead is something else entirely. Small human vessels breaking from their scattered positions across the system and converging, with a coordination that leaves no room for doubt about how long this maneuver has been planned, directly toward our fleet. Doran Vex's voice cuts across the bridge, sharp with an urgency that finally matches the gravity of what we are facing. All weapons to full readiness, shields at maximum output, escort formation, close ranks around the flagship. Our fleet begins to respond, the massive bulk of the Ardent Resolve and its 4 escort cruisers shifting into the defensive posture that has protected Council fleets through countless engagements across 1,000 worlds. I have seen this formation hold against far larger numbers than what our sensors show approaching now. By every measure of raw power, we should be more than capable of weathering whatever this small collection of human vessels intends to throw at us. I realize, within moments, how completely I have misjudged the shape of the danger we are actually facing. The human vessels do not approach in the disorganized rush I might have expected from a desperate, outmatched defender. They move instead with a fluid, coordinated precision that reminds me, with a chill I cannot suppress, of the sensor logs from the Wandering Star incident, each ship adjusting its trajectory in response to the movements of the others, with a speed and accuracy that suggests either extraordinary individual skill or some form of coordination between the vessels that our own systems struggle to identify. Multiple contacts closing on Escort 3, Yoran Dask calls out, his earlier dismissiveness entirely gone now, replaced by the sharp focus of a soldier finally confronting a threat he can no longer underestimate. They are not engaging directly. They appear to be targeting something specific. On the main display, I watch as a cluster of small human vessels moves in a tight, coordinated pattern around one of our escort cruisers, and for a moment, I cannot understand what they are attempting. Then Prel Ashun's voice rises in alarm from her station, and the picture becomes horribly clear. "They are targeting our shield emitters directly," she says. "Precise strikes, avoiding our primary hull and weapon systems entirely. They are not trying to destroy the ship. They are trying to strip its defenses." I watch, along with the rest of the bridge, as Escort 3's shields begin flickering under the concentrated, precisely placed strikes. Each impact landing exactly where our own tactical database indicates our shield generators are most vulnerable. A level of technical knowledge about our own ship systems that no newly contacted species should possess. Within minutes, the escort's shields collapse entirely, and rather than pressing forward to destroy the now vulnerable vessel, the human ships peel away just as precisely as they arrived, leaving Escort 3 exposed but intact, drifting helplessly at the edge of the engagement. "They disabled it without destroying it," I say quietly, understanding dawning through the fear gripping my chest. They are demonstrating exactly what they are capable of, and exactly how much restraint they are choosing to show. Doran Vex hears me, and I see something in his expression shift, the last remnants of his earlier certainty, finally cracking under the weight of what we are witnessing. "Focus fire on the retreating vessels," he orders, and our escort cruisers respond. Weapon systems opening fire on the small, fast-moving human ships as they withdraw from Escort 3's position. Not a single shot connects. I watch our targeting systems track the human vessels with everything our fleet's considerable technology can offer, and still every shot passes through empty space where the ships have already moved. Evasive patterns so precise and unpredictable that our weapon systems cannot adjust their calculations quickly enough to compensate. It is not that our weapons lack the power to destroy these small ships. It is that our weapons cannot land a single hit against pilots who seem to anticipate every calculation our targeting systems attempt to make. "How?" Doran Vex says, and for the first time since I have known him, his voice carries something unmistakable and entirely new. uncertainty. I do not have an answer for him. I only have the growing, terrible understanding that everything we assumed about this mission, every calculation built on 1,000 previous successful engagements against 1,000 other species, has been fundamentally, catastrophically wrong from the very beginning. The engagement continues, and the pattern repeats itself across our fleet, with a consistency that leaves no room for doubt about what is happening. Human vessels strike with surgical precision at our shield generators, our communication arrays, our sensor systems, disabling critical capabilities one by one, while carefully avoiding strikes that would cause catastrophic destruction or loss of life. Our own weapons, meanwhile, continue to fail to land meaningful hits, our targeting systems consistently outmaneuvered by pilots and, I begin to suspect, some coordinating intelligence working alongside them that understands our tactics and our technology with a depth that should be impossible for a species with such a limited history of contact with the wider universe. I think, in the chaos of the unfolding engagement, of the buried wandering star report, of a species that struck once, decades ago, with precision and success, and disappeared from serious council attention in the aftermath. I understand now, with terrible clarity, exactly what those missing decades were truly used for. Not simple technological growth. Careful, patient study of exactly the kind of fleet the Council would eventually send, and exactly how to defeat it without ever needing to destroy it outright. Communications are down across 3 vessels, Prelashuan reports, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. Escort 2 and Escort 4 have lost primary shield capacity. Escort 3 remains disabled, but has not been further targeted. Doran Vex stands from the command chair, and for a long moment he simply stares at the display showing our fleet, once the unquestioned symbol of overwhelming council power, now scattered and crippled by a handful of small vessels from a single, previously unremarkable world. I watch the last of his certainty finally break entirely, replaced by something that looks uncomfortably close to the same dread I have carried since our first hours in this system. "Cease fire," he says quietly. "All ships, cease fire immediately. Signal for parley." The order comes almost an hour after the engagement began, and by the time it does, the outcome is already undeniable. Our fleet, the pride of the Council's military strength, has been thoroughly and deliberately dismantled, without a single Council vessel destroyed, without, as far as our own damage reports indicate, a single significant loss of life on either side. It is not the outcome of a battle fought to annihilation. It is the outcome of a demonstration, executed with a precision and restraint that somehow frightens me more than outright destruction would have, because it tells me this species chose exactly how much power to show us, and held back a considerable amount more. The small human vessel that first greeted us at the edge of the system reopens communication almost immediately after Doran Vex's ceasefire order, and Captain Daniel Hart's face appears once more on our main display, calm and unhurried, exactly as it was during our very first exchange. "I did say bring your fleet," he says, and there is no cruelty in his voice, no triumph, only the same steady certainty he showed from the very beginning. "You did. Now maybe we can actually talk." Doran Vex stares at the screen for a long moment, and I watch a man who has spent his entire career believing in the absolute, unquestionable strength of the Council fleet, finally, fully confront the reality that the universe he thought he understood no longer matches the one he now finds himself standing in. "What," he says slowly, "do you want?" Captain Hart's expression shifts slightly, something almost gentle crossing his face, though it does nothing to ease the cold certainty in his eyes. "We're not interested in tribute," he says. "We're not interested in council oversight, and we're not interested in being told our world belongs to anyone but the people living on it. What we want is simple. You leave, you tell your council exactly what happened here today, and you make sure nobody comes back with the same offer twice." I watch Doran Vex absorb these words, watch the last of his old confidence give way to something far more careful, far more respectful of the species we came here to conquer, and are instead leaving humbled and disarmed. And somewhere behind my own fear, my own lingering shock at everything I have witnessed over the past hour, I feel the first faint stirrings of a very different kind of understanding beginning to take root. We did not come here to meet a young, vulnerable species, eager for the Council's protection. We came here, without ever fully realizing it, to wake something that had been quietly, patiently waiting for exactly this moment for 30 long cycles, and had used every single one of those years exceptionally well. The journey back to Council space takes considerably longer than the journey out, and not simply because of the damage our fleet sustained. Doran Vex spends most of that return voyage in near total silence, and I do not press him for conversation, understanding better than most on that battered fleet exactly what kind of reckoning he is working through. A man who built an entire career on certainty has just watched that certainty dismantled as thoroughly and as precisely as our shield generators were, and I suspect it will take him considerably longer than the journey home to fully process what happened in that quiet, unassuming system. I spend much of the return voyage compiling the formal report that Council Command has demanded, and it is, without question, the most difficult document I have written in 30 cycles of service. Not because the facts are unclear. The facts, by this point, are painfully clear to everyone who survived the engagement. The difficulty lies in explaining, to officials who were not there, who did not watch a handful of small vessels dismantle a Council fleet without a single confirmed loss of life on either side, exactly why every assumption our civilization has built its authority upon needs to be reconsidered. I include everything, the pattern I trace through Earth's long and turbulent history, a species that grows stronger with every attempt to break it, the buried report on the wandering star, and the decades of willful blindness that followed its quiet, convenient burial. The precise, restrained demonstration of capability that ended our engagement without a single unnecessary casualty, a choice that I have come to understand was not mercy, but message, a species showing us exactly how much control it possesses over violence it clearly has no shortage of capacity to deliver. And I include, prominently, at the very beginning of my report, those 3 words that started everything, because I believe, more strongly than I have believed anything in a very long time, that the Council needs to understand exactly what those words truly meant before another fleet commander makes the same mistake Doran Vex made in dismissing them. Bring your fleet. Not bravado from a frightened species hoping to bluff its way through an impossible confrontation. Not the desperate defiance of a civilization with nothing left to lose. Those 3 words, I now understand, were an invitation extended with absolute terrible confidence by a species that had already decided, long before our fleet ever arrived at the edge of their system, exactly what it intended to demonstrate, and exactly how thoroughly it intended to demonstrate it. The reception our report receives at Council Command is, in its own way, almost as unsettling as the engagement itself. I watch officials who have spent their careers presiding over 1,000 successful tribute missions struggle to process a failure of this magnitude. Watch the careful, practiced confidence that has defined every conversation I have ever had with Council leadership give way, slowly and reluctantly, to something far more cautious. Earth's formal classification changes within a single cycle of our return, moved from the standard designation applied to newly contacted worlds eligible for tribute status to a new category the Council has rarely needed to use before, one reserved for civilizations whose capabilities and intentions remain too uncertain and too dangerous to approach without extraordinary caution. Existential risk, the classification reads. Contact only through established diplomatic channels. Direct military engagement strongly discouraged pending further assessment. I am asked, in the weeks that follow, to testify before several Council committees, repeating the details of our engagement so many times that the memories begin to feel less like something I lived through, and more like a story I am simply reciting from careful memory. Each time, I find myself returning to the same conclusion, one I have come to believe more firmly with every retelling. We did not fail because Earth possessed weapons more powerful than our own. Ship for ship, our fleet likely retained considerable advantages in raw destructive capability. We failed because we approached an unfamiliar species using assumptions built entirely from 1,000 previous, entirely different encounters, and never once paused to consider that this particular civilization might not fit the pattern we expected it to follow. I think often, during those long weeks of testimony, of the fragments of Earth's history I gathered before the engagement began, of leaders speaking words of defiance to their people during moments of desperate crisis, of a civilization that seemed to grow stronger with every attempt to break it, generation after generation, without a single exception I was ever able to find. I understand now that those fragments were not simply interesting historical curiosities, the kind of cultural trivia the Council usually gathers before a tribute mission and promptly forgets once the mission concludes. They were, in fact, the clearest warning available to us, if only someone had been willing to take them seriously before it was too late. Word of what happened in Earth's system spread slowly across the wider galaxy, carried through the careful, controlled channels the Council uses to manage information about sensitive incidents. But spread it does, and I begin to hear, in the months that follow, how other species and other governments have started to speak of that quiet, unassuming yellow star system with a mixture of fascination and unease that no world has inspired in generations. Some call it a lesson in the dangers of assumption, a cautionary tale for any power that mistakes unfamiliarity for weakness. Others speak of it with something closer to dark humor, a story told and retold with the particular relish reserved for tales of the mighty humbled by the unexpected. I hear secondhand that those 3 words Captain Hart spoke during our very first exchange have already begun to travel through diplomatic circles across the galaxy, repeated sometimes as warning, sometimes as jest, but always, I notice, with a note of genuine respect that few species outside the Council's own membership are ever granted. Bring your fleet. I think, in my quieter moments, about what those words truly represent, beyond the immediate tactical lesson they taught our Council fleet on that long and difficult day. I think about a species that faced overwhelming, unfamiliar power, not with the desperate terror I expected, but with calm, patient confidence built from a history of impossible odds faced, and somehow, against all reasonable expectation, overcome. I think about 30 quiet years spent preparing for exactly the moment our fleet finally arrived, and about how completely that preparation succeeded in reshaping how an entire galaxy now understands one small, previously unremarkable world. Doran Vex retires from active fleet command not long after our return, and though the official records list his departure as a routine transition after a long and distinguished career, I understand, better than most, the true weight behind that decision. I do not think he ever fully recovers from watching everything he believed about the nature of power and certainty crumble so thoroughly in the space of a single afternoon. I find, to my own surprise, that I do not feel any satisfaction in watching that certainty break. I only feel a quiet, lingering gratitude that I survived long enough to understand exactly what we had almost done, and exactly what price we very nearly paid for refusing to listen. I remain in Council service, though my role shifts considerably in the years that follow, and I find myself, more often than I ever expected, called upon to advise newer liaison officers preparing for missions to unfamiliar worlds. I tell them always, at the very beginning of every briefing, the same story I have told here, and I end that story the same way every time, with the same 3 words that change the way an entire galaxy understands the concept of an ultimatum. I tell them to listen carefully to what a species says about itself, in its history, in its struggles, in the stories it chooses to tell about its own darkest moments. I tell them that confidence and desperation can sound remarkably similar to an outsider, unwilling to look closely enough to tell the difference, and that the cost of confusing one for the other can be measured not simply in ships and shields, but in the reputation of an entire civilization that believed, until the moment it was proven wrong, that it understood exactly how the universe was supposed to work. And I tell them, finally, about a small, patient, unremarkable ship that once sat at the edge of a system, facing down a fleet capable of ending its entire world, and answered every demand for submission with nothing more than calm, unshaken certainty. Because somewhere out there, across the vast, quiet dark between the stars, I believe that world is still watching, still patient, still prepared, and I do not believe the galaxy has fully learned, even now, exactly what it means to wake something that has spent its entire history refusing, against every reasonable expectation, to ever truly be broken.